Thanks for everybody joining us bright and early on a Wednesday morning here. Really honored to kick off Reboot 2017 with the Lincoln Initiative, and really honored to share the stage with two great up-and-coming members of Congress. Representative Hurd represents the 23rd District of Texas. So Representative Hurd started out his career as an undercover officer in the CIA and the Middle East and South Asia for almost a decade.
No big deal.
After leaving the CIA, became a senior advisor with a cybersecurity firm. Important expertise these days. Covered wide range of challenges faced by manufacturers, financial institutions, retailers, and critical infrastructure owners. He currently serves on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, chairs the IT subcommittee, also sits on Committee on Homeland Security, and is the vice chair of the Border and Maritime Security Subcommittee. And just this year, he was appointed by Speaker Ryan to serve on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence to replace Representative Pompeo. After his confirmation to the CIA. He's also widely considered a rising star in the Republican Party. Politico magazine, just 2 weeks ago, it was the cover story calling him the future of the GOP. So
there was an asterisk, if I could win again. Right? You know? Kind of rude, I thought, but.
Representative Moulton, born and raised and represents the 6th District of Massachusetts. He started his career in the Marine Corps, serving 4 tours in Iraq as a Marine Corps infantry officer, including 2 as an infantry platoon commander and 2 as a special assistant to General Petraeus. Left the Marines in 2008 with the rank of captain, attended Harvard Business School and the Kennedy School of Government, and then worked in the private sector. Representative Moulton serves on House Armed Services Committee and the Budget Committee, and has been mentioned recently by the New York Times as a potential presidential candidate for 2020.
Big asterisk on that one.
So we truly are joined by 2 of the future leaders of both the Democratic and Republican Party, and also really defied expectations to get into Congress and fought really tough races to get here. But also, you really think very effectively about solving problems and are pragmatic, look to as pragmatic problem solvers. So I'd like to start off with just a question about your background. Both of you started your career with almost a decade overseas. You also both have science backgrounds. Representative Moulton, you studied physics. Representative Hurd, computer science. Neither of you are lawyers. So I'd be curious, do you think these experiences give you a different perspective than many of your colleagues on the Hill, or a different approach to problem solving?
I mean, look, I think it does. Thank you all so much for having us here. It's great to be here, an honor to be here with someone that I really truly respect across the aisle, not only for his service before coming to Congress, but for his bipartisanship in Congress. And we just got a bill signed by the president last night that we've worked on together for a while. So it's an honor to be here. Look. There are very few people with a technical background at all in Congress, and yet we deal with a lot of technical matters, and ever more so as technology becomes such a part of our daily lives, and we have to legislate to address those needs. You know, I like to say my degree in physics is great because everybody in life who sees my resume and not my transcript makes me sound really smart. But it does just give you a perspective that a lot of other people don't have. I'm considered a half member of the physics caucus on Capitol Hill because I don't have a PhD, only an undergrad degree. But the physics caucus is very, very small. There are only a few of us.
Well, I just learned something new. I didn't realize he was a physics major. We got to talk about space a little bit more because there's all kinds of things going on, and I have a McDonald Observatory in my district, but having a technical background helps us address these technical challenges, and we're able to understand the kind of leadership that is needed to solve these problems. I always say the technology is there to solve many of our problems. It's just having the will to implement it, and having experiences. Guys like Seth and I, we have a bias towards action because of our previous experiences. And I would say that's something that I think both Seth and I would agree on, that our class on both sides of the aisle, have that bias towards action. And I think you see that in the freshman class as well, too. So, knowing, having previously solved tough problems, having come out of two organizations where yes is the answer, what is the question, we bring that kind of mentality to our work here on the Hill. And that's why I think we're able to cross party lines and work together despite some of the atmosphere that we see on TV and reading the newspapers.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about the bill that was just signed into law? Congratulations, by the way. A round of applause.
A Modernizing Government Travel Act will basically enable federal employees across the government to get reimbursed for using rideshare, bike share services, which many employees right now are not able to get reimbursed for. I mean, look, this is not a new healthcare plan for all of America. I mean, hopefully we can work on that next. But it is something that will make a difference in people's lives, and it will save taxpayer money. It's common sense stuff that we should be able to get done despite the bitter partisan divides in Congress right now.
American people want us to do things that make sense, and this is an example. And when you build up victories like this, then I think that creates the ability to tackle some of the really big and complicated problems. And it's because I think this was the first thing we started working on together last Congress, and it helped us build a relationship. So these types of initiatives not only are going to save taxpayer dollars, it's going to help those in government be able to be a little bit more efficient, but it also builds those relationships between lawmakers to solve big challenges.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I think that this bill is a great example of technology is moving into our everyday lives. It is the infrastructure of our everyday lives at this point. Steve Case talks a lot about this, right? We're moving into a third wave, and the tech sector is no longer just tech, it's health and finance and education and transportation, and these are highly regulated sectors. So I guess, and the way that I describe this with Congress is it's not just a slice of the policymaking pie, tech isn't, it's the crust. It's the crust of all of these issues. So I guess, simple question, is Congress equipped and ready for this sort of fundamental transformation about how we think about legislating?
No. But look, I think our colleagues recognize the opportunity. And I use DOD and VA as an example. This is something that's near and dear to both of our hearts. Those are the two largest healthcare providers in the world, and their electronic health records don't talk to one another. In the past, $500 billion was spent on trying to achieve that true interoperability. Now, if the DOD and the VA can achieve interoperability, that becomes a standard for everything else. And if we achieve true interoperability, what that allows us to do with that data, you can do virtualized research cohorts where you can solve problems and keep people alive for longer. Actually achieving a longitudinal record, that one individual is going to be healthier and happier. This is the opportunity that the federal government has, and if we're able to do that, this is kind of the DARPA moment, right? That we've had in the past. We can do that, and I think our colleagues are starting to realize that, but we have to increase the common body of knowledge on how these tools can be used. And that's why it has to be done with the private sector. That's why events like this is important in order to continue pushing members and their staffs and the committees to understand what's out there, right? And I think one of the experiences that was helpful for me is being in government and getting out and seeing the tools and how things are done and being able to bring some of that back in. That cross-pollination of ideas is important, and I don't think we have enough of that happening on the key committees and with individual members of Congress.
So to follow up on that question, increasing this flow, this cross body of knowledge, what are other things? What are other things that we can be doing? Do we need more mechanisms? Congress used to have an Office of Technology Assessment. Now, granted, it had real problems. But are there mechanisms that we should have? Are there organizations that should be working on how we can improve that flow? I mean, you have a bill for a cyber national guard. I guess that's more focused on the executive branch than the legislative branch. But could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, when Congress needs to give the tools and the resources to the executive branch in order to be efficient, right? I think that's the number one role of Congress. But Congress, we also need to make sure that we're utilizing things in order to engage with our constituents. The tools that I have access to are pretty archaic in order to engage with constituents. But this notion of a cyber national guard, once we're working on this bill to empower CIOs to have working capital funds, and it's going to be on the floor today and passed by the end of the week. But the Cyber National Guard is real simple. Starts with, if you're a kid and you want to go to school and do something around cybersecurity, we'll get you a scholarship, and then you're going to come in and work in the government. It's not going to be at the NSA or DOD. It's going to be at the Census Bureau. It's going to be at Department of Interior. It's going to be in DHS. And then you serve in the government for the same amount of time you got a scholarship. And then when you go work for the private sector, they're going to loan you back for the proverbial 10 days a quarter or 1 week in a month, whatever. That is how you can start making sure that you have people that have worked in government working in these large networks. You don't see the size like anywhere else other than in government. And that's a tool, that's an experience that's valuable for the private sector. But then you go out and while you're working in the private sector, you're bringing some of that experience back in. And so that's how we can get that rotational kind of mentality and experience, and not, because we're never going to be able to compete with the private sector when it comes to salaries. And so making sure that we're creating connections other ways. And this is a big initiative that we've been working on, and this is kind of my next big project we're going to take once we put MGT to bed.
Great, thanks. Representative Moulton, we were talking backstage. One of your first hires when you first came to Congress was a technical hire, and you had him building. You had him build I think you said a dashboard for your office. I like to talk about, there are 15,000 staff in Congress. I found 6 staffers that have any formal technical training. How can Congress?
Can you give me that list? All right.
Absolutely, I could name it off for you right now. How can we incentivize Congress? Seamus Kraft is sitting over here. He's got a proposal for a congressional digital service. How can we incentivize members of Congress to be hiring for this kind of expertise? And what was your experience having a staffer doing that kind of work?
Yeah, so we hired a computer programmer, which is just not something that you ever see on a congressional staff, and he helped do some stuff for office. If you walk into our office or you look at my website, we have this, it's a vertical TV screen that just talks about some of the stuff we do, and it's sort of in an early stage now where it's just sort of static slides. We do update it regularly with new data. Like, you can always look at what our response rate is for replying to your mail, for example, if you write in. But we hope to eventually make it more dynamic and more interactive. But yeah, this is obviously not something that that Congress provides. And it's not something that had been done before. So we had to just hire a programmer to do it ourselves. But we were excited to do that. I came in with this attitude that, look, if Congress was working really well, it'd be pretty arrogant to get elected and say, okay, I'm going to do everything differently. But in fact, the opposite is the case. So we should try to do things differently to try to do them better. But I think that to answer your question at a more fundamental level, there are 2 things. One, there's a lack of understanding in Congress. And I'm talking about us, the people who hire people. Because fundamentally, that's how you change it, is to get a better understanding of how important technical knowledge is to our government, to our country, and to our leadership. I once was trying to communicate with one of our party leaders and asked the staff for an email address. There was this huge flurry and all these phone calls and everything. And like in the middle of a meeting, I got a phone call, and I'm like, look, this is not urgent. I just wanted to send you an email. And what I realized is that my colleague didn't have an email address, so they just use phones. So in my office, we use Slack. So we don't use email for internal communication anymore. We're on Slack. So we've sort of gone one step beyond email. But a lot of people aren't even to email yet. So there's just a lack of understanding. But I think there's also a little deeper, more insidious problem, which is there's also just a lack of respect, I think, for technology and for science in general. We refer to the science committee on our side of the aisle as the anti-science committee because we have a chairman who doesn't even believe in science. And so that is a problem that we've got to figure out too, is getting Congress back to the point where we can have our partisan disagreements. We can debate the issues. We can have different political perspectives, but we ought to have a basic fundamental respect for the facts. And that's a challenge.
And data matters, and I think the way you change people's opinions on technology and information is making sure you get them real hard data on which you can make good decisions. And that is something that can work in an individual member's office. It's something that can work on an agency. The first hearing I held as a chairman of the IT subcommittee within OGR was on the Data Act. And I'm like, what's the Data Act? And it was like, well, we had to pass a bill to make sure people keep track of like dollars and cents. And I'm like, are you serious? I can't figure out how many pencils the federal government, bought last year. And the answer was basically no. And so we didn't even have a framework on how, what kinds of information, what attributes that these agencies should be keeping track of. Now we have that framework, and now we got to make sure people are actually putting the right data in.
This is something
it's something basic.
Yeah, this is something I hear from constituents, but millennials, people our age all the time, is why can't you guys just make data-driven decisions? Data-driven decision-making. That's not something I hear, honestly, from like my parents' generation. That's not a phrase that they use, but it's a phrase that people our age use a lot. And we'd be a lot better off if we did more of that in Washington.
And it would take some of the bass out of everybody's voice when it comes to some of these debates, because we can say, hey, here is, the data speaks for itself. And I will say this about Seth's first hire. When I walked into his office the first time and I saw their thing, I was like, where do I get one of these? So it's pretty cool.
So why do you think it took so long to get something like the Data Act passed? Is this do we need new blood in the institution, or can you teach an old dog new tricks?
I'll take that. I think we need new blood. I think that at some point you just need to get a new generation of leaders in Congress and in our country. So there are a lot of great, truly historic political figures in Congress today. But I think historic is an operative word, and it's time to get some new thinking. Yeah, sometimes you can teach an old dog new tricks, but once again, I don't think that people look at Congress and say, okay, those guys got it figured out. Let's just keep doing what we're doing.
So shifting gears a little bit to think about where we're going in technology. Lincoln had an event a few weeks ago in San Francisco with Sam Altman, head of Y Combinator, and he has essentially said that when we think about automation, essentially any job that doesn't entail repeatable tasks, or that entails repeatable tasks and B does not require a human connection, is going to be automated, and it's going to happen a lot more quickly than we think. So, Representative Moulton, you are the co-chair of the New Dems Future of Work Task Force. What does Congress need to be doing to be ready for this massive disruption in employment? And what do we need to be thinking about that we're not right now?
So just about everything. I think that first it's important to say that this absolutely will be massive for our country, for our entire world. And of course, people will debate, well, is this going to be as big as the Industrial Revolution or not? There's a legitimate debate out there. I think a lot of people think it'll be more significant. There are a lot of people wondering whether there simply will be as many jobs going forward as there are today. So this is a huge issue that we have to tackle as a country. And I'll tell you, we're not even, hardly anybody in Congress is even talking about it. So I think that this is something that Washington just hasn't even come to terms with, first of all. Second of all, it's also a great opportunity, because if we can figure out how to address this and we can be leading the world in how to address this, then we're going to be ahead of everybody else in facing this massive challenge. But I think that, in some ways, I would say that Sam's estimate is even a little bit conservative, because I think when you hear him describe the jobs that will be automated that way, people don't think of like lawyers, for example, in that category, and yet lawyers are being automated out of existence today. And I think that when you just talk to someone on a factory floor in middle America right now, they're not really worried about having their job taken by a robot. Sorry, they're about by a Mexican. They're worried about being taken by a robot. That's what they're worried about. And they're worried that when they look up at the management, sitting in that glass window above them in the office, they're worried that they're going to hire a robot that will not only take their job, but the job of 4 of their friends. So that's the real challenge facing the American economy today and facing the American workforce. That's why so many people in middle America do feel left out, because they are losing their jobs. And we've got to be able to come to terms with that so we can figure out how to address it. And the last thing I'll say, just as sort of a general overview of this, is that I think the solutions are hard. I was sitting across from Bill Gates at dinner a couple months ago, and he's been promoting this idea of a robot tax. And a lot of people disagree with it, but it's just sort of one idea that's out there. And Bill Gates is an incredibly thoughtful guy. He's, I don't love his operating system, but he's a great, he's a total Apple guy, but he's a great guy. And so you don't expect Bill Gates to just sort of throw out an idea like that without having some, real evidence and data to back it up. And so I was very interested to hear his defense of this particular policy solution that he proposed. And I'll tell you, his reaction was basically, oh God, I don't even know. I'm just trying to throw out some idea so we can start the discussion. So this is going to be a hard challenge, but we've got to start addressing it.
This is going to be driven by AI and machine learning, and we don't understand the 3rd, 4th, and 5th order effects of this boom. I think we're going to see different kinds of jobs. We have to prepare our kids now for jobs that do not exist today. And I go back to this issue in West Texas at the McDonald Observatory. The astronomer, his biggest issue is he doesn't have enough coders, because he's looking for 1 million exoplanets. Those are planets outside of our solar system that we can potentially live on. Telescopes now, you don't put your eye in and look into the sky. They're basically big sensors. And he's getting so much data that he can't manage it. And so his data analytics team has to grow. So this is an example of how you're going to have different kinds of jobs. But it starts with making sure every kid is getting exposed to coding. Right? If data is going to be the lingua franca of the future, if data is the coin of the realm, coding is the lingua franca. And we got to make sure that middle school kids are getting exposed to coding so that they understand these jobs that are going to exist into the future. Because we can't figure this. We're not going to be able to figure it out ourselves. We may have an idea of what the next phase is going to be, but we should also embrace it and not be afraid of it. But we also have to realize is that our future is going to, the technological change we're going to see in the next 20 years is going to make the last 20 years look insignificant.
Yeah,
and we have to be prepared.
It's not just that the change will be dramatic, but that it'll be so fast. And that we've got to your point, Will, I mean, we've got to really rethink our education system, I believe, to do 2 things. One, to, yes, prepare students to be able to code and things like that, to have a technical education, which many of them don't get today. But also to be able to think about how we teach kids to do the job that today they might get for the next 10 years, but 10 years from now, how do we re-educate them to do a job that doesn't even exist now or won't exist, So that's the degree to which our education system has to be continually evolving, I think, is a real challenge.
We got about 6 minutes left, and we'd like to take some audience Q&A. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. And please identify yourself, where you're coming from, and please make sure your question, in fact, ends with a question mark.
Good morning, Alex Howard, Sunlight Foundation. Thank you for your support of the Open Government Data Act. We're talking about data-driven decision-making. That seems pretty important. We're also at Sunlight supporting the Preserving Government Data Act because people are concerned about continuing public access to public data. You all read the headlines. You know that there are questions about the future of a lot of data that the government produces. So 2 questions. One, what happened to the Evidence-Based Policy Commission, something we saw bipartisan support? And you mentioned challenges around science. We've seen scientific policy become polarized in this country, even though there used to be wide bipartisan support for basic R&D. Do you guys support more basic R&D in the country, funding for that? And how do we avoid seeing technology policy become polarized or on partisan lines as well? And you can see this happening right now around the debate on open internet rules and net neutrality.
Yeah, these are great questions, and my concern is that when you see this becoming polarized, when you see the understanding of basic facts and science become a political issue, it not only hurts progress in our country, it really hurts competitiveness with the rest of the world. I mean, there was a time in the 1950s when we doubled down as a nation in a completely bipartisan way to say, wow, the Soviets look like they're beating us in science, and we're not going to let that happen. And if you went back to the 1950s and showed them Congress today, where people are dismissing science, I mean, they wouldn't even believe that that could be happening right now. There was this supreme respect for the understanding of science because we knew it was essential to our competitiveness, to our national security. We wanted to have the best scientists in the world, not be debating whether or not facts are true. So that's why I say that there's got to be a better understanding. We've got to pass these laws and everything else, but there also just has to be a restoration of the basic respect for the role of science in our lives, and the fact that if we're not leading the way in science, we're not going to be leading the way as a country, period.
Yeah, I think we can get to a point where we can accept the data, but we're going to have disagreements on what we should do next and what the inferences on the data is, and that's, I think, has always been the case. The commission you mentioned, I'm unfamiliar with that. I'd love to learn more, and this is one of the areas that our subcommittee has been looking at, and I love the National Archives. It's one of my favorite things in D.C., and we've been looking at how do we do something with them. So I'd love to talk to you further about some of these concepts and how we can at least start having a conversation on how we do this in the future to ensure that we are preserving that kind of information.
One of the things that I know when I go and sit down with my colleague Will here is that we can have a discussion that is based on the facts. And you're right, we might disagree about what the policy prescription is, or what the political implications are. But we can at least start on the same sheet of music, and we're not going to debate basic facts. And, sadly, I can't have that same level of basic respect and understanding with all of my colleagues.
We have a question here.
On both sides of the aisle.
Good morning, Rich Butel. What is your vision of the current state of federal IT infrastructure, and what are the ramifications of where we are with respect to that infrastructure?
I'll take that one, Seth. Look, Rich, we've had this conversation many times. We're backwards. We're not utilizing some of the latest technology. There's a lot of talk about how COBOL is still being used within the federal government. COBOL was old when I was going to university, right? And what's interesting is that's not necessarily the bad thing. It's what are we putting on top of the COBOL to access it, right? Are we doing, the fact that it wasn't until last year or a couple months ago that the federal government wasn't using two-factor authentication in order to get into their systems. Like, come on, this is basic stuff. And so what we're trying to address with the Modernizing Government Technology Act is to allow the CIOs to have the authority to, if you're responsible for defending the network, you should have the authority to buy the widgets to put on the network, right? It only makes sense, and they haven't had that. And so we tried to address that with FITARA, and now we're saying if you realize savings and by transitioning into the cloud. I never really act like the cloud is new technology. Hello, the cloud is, should be standard. But that's the mentality that we still have in parts of the federal government. If you manage that transition and you save money, you can put that money into a working capital fund and use it for up to 3 years. So that gets rid of that you use it, you lose it.
My first chief of staff went to the House IT folks because we wanted to use Evernote. And he was told, nope, Evernote is forbidden because it's in the cloud.
We have time for one more quick question.
Hi, good morning. My name is Melissa Medina. I work for the Congressional App Challenge. And I wanted to first say thank you to Congressman Moulton and Congressman Hurd for being up there today and sharing a candid view of how technology is in government. And also thank you for both hosting an app challenge in your district to inspire kids to code. With that kind of initiative, the first question is, how do we get more members involved? We had a third of the members participate, and it's on its 3rd year. But as you say, inspiring students to get into STEM education is a big issue. So how do we do that? And then secondly, are there other initiatives in Congress that are being pushed through to help inspire kids in STEM?
So first, let us know the list of people that didn't have folks involved. And I think when we have the kids come up that do the app, let's get them in some of their offices and just show it, right? And show what they did. And so, the member sees it and it's like, oh, that may inspire something. I know we've missed that opportunity with this last group, but if they see it themselves and be like, why aren't we doing this, right? I think that's how we possibly push more people to get in. And by the way, Lincoln Labs, come on, y'all. Y'all should have a Snapchat filter for this. So just FYI, I'm trying to take a snap anyways. I'll put that in the suggestion box. And if y'all want to follow me, Hurd on the Hill, all right, HURD on the Hill. And what else? What other initiatives? For me, we're trying to introduce coding into algebra classes in middle schools. And we're working with UT Austin and many of the schools in my district and great corporate sponsors like Facebook and Dell and Microsoft and Toyota to train teachers in algebra to introduce coding there. So that's one way. Next fall, there's going to be 5,000 kids in my district that are going to be exposed to coding, and they never would have before that. So that's a personal initiative that we're working on, and I'm going to try to show this success to some of my colleagues to try to get them inspired them to do in other places.